Hi, and welcome to the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. Today, we're happy to welcome Natalia, co-founder and CEO at Chaos, a location intelligence platform that provides urban forecasts and insights. Unlike existing visualizing tools and data platforms, Chaos applies innovative technologies like GIS, AI, and machine learning. Natalia describes herself as a bold, tenacious, passionate professional focused in smart cities. If you're an urban tech founder about to raise a round, do reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see if we should play together. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head on over to eu.vc, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EU VC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to eu.vc.
Hi, Natalia. Thank you for being our guest today and welcome to the Urban Tech VC podcast. We met first over a year ago at Slush, right? And we got to know you, KJ and I, as a true urban visionary and a jack of all trades, so to speak. You're doing a lot of things, right? You're an influencer, computer science engineer, and CEO of your own company that is focused on enhancing decision-making in urban contexts with data. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you're doing, what really gets you passionate about the topic of urban decision-making, and why did you ultimately found your own company, Chaos Architects?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. Maybe 1 year ago, I wouldn't have expected that you are inviting me to this podcast. So I think that you guys, overall three, are very good at speaking and really poking and asking the right questions. So again, thank you for inviting me. Who am I? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I'm Finnish Mexican. I'm from the north border of Mexico, so my childhood is like American Mexican in a way. I've been living in 5 different countries: Asian, European, African. Now I'm here in Finland. And I have a background in the boring stuff, like in computer science and architecture. So that's the boring stuff. The interesting stuff is that I'm just interested in a lot of different things, and mostly about equality, I would say. Why? I don't know, but it's maybe because I grew up seeing very ugly cities, these big boxes like McDonald's and, this kind of architecture. And I always thought as a girl that could I just have a magic wand that I could just swap buildings, Maybe then I realized that there's something to be done in cities. My passion started there. Not everybody has good housing. Not everybody can afford it. And as I started traveling, coming from a very broken urban fabric, I desired a bit more of control in the cities, in infrastructure, quality, and so on. However, when I ended up also in Finland, then I realized that control is not always good. So then you need the social fabric. And that's what makes our cities super interesting. In Corona, we realized that when we are isolated, we are not happy.
Can you explain your first steps towards what you're doing with Chaos Architects and give us a little bit of a glimpse on what the company is about and how you're trying to solve the issue that you've been just describing?
Well, we started with the vision of livable cities. That's our vision. And when we started, we were called very romantic by investors and overall, And now we are the hottest startup trying to fix sustainable things and so on. But why do we start it like that? It's because as an architect, your formation, in order to build something, whatever it is, you need to study about the people that is going to use the building. And those kind of studies, before you actually design the plan or the building or whatever it is, you have to do a lot of research. Usually it's done manually. It's where are people walking? In the snow, you can, now that we have snow in Finland, you can see that right away where people walk. It's not on sidewalks. So those are kind of things that you grow up with, understanding and who is visiting and what kind of social economic status they have, so many things. So then with all the tech coming, then you realize that why are we doing this manually still instead of just like automating this? And then that's where my mind is very engineering wise, that we need to automate. I once sat in front of a coffee shop. I put a camera, just drank a lot of coffees there. Then when I had enough footage, then I went and checked like how many people walked by and what kind of environment was it, and were they running, walking fast or strolling or so on. So those things that are done very manually, we wanted to add, automate. And then in the process, we discovered that actually that's what our customers, property developers, real estate investors, architects are looking for. Like those things they cannot have right now. So like give me that people, at the end of the day, people, it's their end consumer and customer. So that's how we started. And now, well, we collect holistic data, anything that has like a space and a time, like a point in data, that has space and time. So that we collect and we add, and then we understand through data science how are the parts affecting each other.
And how does that factor into your vision of a livable city? So what is a livable city for you, and like how does that fit this vision?
That's something maybe I cannot answer completely. It's a very debated topic, like in urban planning and social like careers or themes or topics. Livability could be different for you than for me. I'm happiest when I'm maybe having forest. For another person could be when they can play basketball or, But so it's a subjective thing. But we see it from the human rights perspective that everybody needs to have a house. Everybody needs to have water. We all need to move to work or somewhere else. So we see it from that point of view. And livability for me would be that, come on, like we spend half of our income in housing. It's like, wouldn't it be great to have more income and less mortgage, for example? Something that I like about the mayor of Bogota, if you have heard it, it's like a rich city is that one where rich people actually ride the public transport. And in Latin American countries, like if you have a car, it's a sign of status, of wealth. But it's actually not like that. Here in the metro, I ride in Finland. I ride with the president, So it's, we're all equal. So that's why we're seeking for livable cities. So what does it mean? Well, it means that we all have access to the same opportunities of living.
You mentioned when we discussed about what should we look at talking to you, that you are pretty close connected to urban sustainability and the UN SDG goals, or UNSD goals, how to ever say that, the UN SDGs. And now the way you describe it, it's really pretty natural. It seems like it has been part of what you were doing, like since you have been a young girl. But was it really that way? Did you build up a business around that values and principles, or did it take more effort to make it a part of your business?
I'm so glad you're asking it like that, because when I was thinking about this, it has been very natural. And even finding my co-founder, Paloma, she's also an architect, like she thought exactly the same. And I think it's our formation overall that you're embedded with this. Urban planning theory has existed like for decades, centuries already. Sustainability is not a new concept of this decade. So we grew up with seeing a lot of different plans. For example, the one from Barcelona, the one that proposed these huge blocks with parks and so on, was already in 1800s. So he was driving two things. It was like equality and urban quality. So imagine that already he thought that that should be part of how we plan our cities in like centuries ago. So when we started Chaos, it was super evident for us that we want to do this. And luckily, we found also our management team that feels the same. I think that we have found a very nice balance of people that are super caring for the world and super experts in their area. So real estate, data science, architecture, urban planning, but also very caring. That's very difficult to find. We know that because we have been hiring. So
how did you manage to find those people?
I think it was just like open to life, to opportunities. And when we were hiring, we always like told the story. Not always. I mean, it's difficult to find the person, but then when you find it, it's like love. And then it was, like this is the one. And today, if I look when we were having our own like Christmas party and so on, the dynamic of the whole team, it's very similar. It's that they're all working as a team. Like if we achieve this, it's all of us. And if we don't, it's all of us. Yeah.
We're touching on two very interesting phenomenons right now, right? Or like topics. One, KJ, you mentioned UN SDGs, and Natalia, you mentioned the vision alignment, right? And within your team. But the question is, in the bigger scheme of things that you are tackling also with your company, but also with your mission and as a founder, you cannot do this alone, right? And when we talk about livable and sustainable cities, there are obvious things that all cross our minds, right? Like you mentioned public transport, right? So we all know from an efficiency standpoint, from an emission standpoint, public transport is the easiest way, right, to solve a lot of issues. But it's also the most obvious one. Can you give us a little bit more insights on what other levers do you see? And very importantly, what can we and what can entrepreneurs, what can companies, what can founders and businesses add to really lever opportunities to create more livable and more sustainable cities that contribute to the UN SDGs?
I see that transportation is something very big when we think about sustainable cities. Why? Because we have perhaps more data. It's easier to quantify than social aspect. But also because there was a big change already in China with logistics, with Alibaba and so on, and companies moving online as well. Also, if I touch here also the concept of smart cities, which is kind of touching into sustainable cities and like urban tech and so on. Smart cities initially, or how they started, there was a lot of focus in IoT, like let's put sensors everywhere. And actually data is generated other ways as well. I think that smart cities is the holistic way. That's something I truly believe. And mostly people, like smart people as well, not smart people that use smartphones, but, people, intelligence and decision-making and so on. If we see it holistically, that is a smart city or a city that is going to move towards sustainability. And also why? Because I feel that the name that we have, chaos, everything, every part affects each other. Chaos is not disorder, it's complexity. And when you are studying the universe, I wanted to be an astronaut, so I know about this. I read a lot about this, like how parts affect each other. And when you have a system, they create, when you change one particle, the other particle moves. So it becomes a chaotic system. So if you put more transportation, what's going to happen in the city? Or if you don't put effort in infrastructure, what's going to happen? So that's exactly how we feel about how cities work. And then what can we do moving forward? I see that there's responsibility and from the public and private side. In order to answer that question, which is super complex, again, because it's chaos, you have to understand them. So the private sector basic need is to have higher yields. And they come from the banking industry. And the banking industry invests to make more money. That's the biggest motivator. And the public sector, their mainly need or motivator will be attract more taxpayers. And when you do that, then you want to retain them. So how do these two get what they want, like combining themselves? There's a lot of parts moving in there. So you have to sell or rent the land and then ask that you need housing. And then the other one has to believe that if they build certain housing, they're going to get a bigger yield and so on. But what motivates them to work together? I think it's the law. So when the law is passed, EU taxonomy and so on, then both are pushed to work together. Then you realize that I cannot achieve this in my own. And what would be answering your question, what can anyone do to actually be more sustainable or start adopting things that make cities more sustainable? In my opinion, it's just thinking as a forerunner. It's hard. It's like you need to do a lot of strategies to start adopting, what's going to be in the future. Like, what's going to come? Like, what can I do today that would help me in the future? And I think it's a very basic principle of humanity. Why do we grow old? Or when do we grow old as humans or persons? When we stop learning, or when we stop like doing new things. And a business grows old when they stop learning or doing new things. And that's the real estate industry today. It's an old industry.
I agree. I mean, but there are more companies attached to or that could take action than just real estate companies, right? But what you're saying, as a company, like coming from a private sector, I could also say, okay, look, I can move to Berlin, or I can move to London. I can move with my company. I can move to Paris, or I could move to Amsterdam, right? So I can also play. Or my understanding as private companies, I look at it as infrastructure, as commodity. Like, what do I get? And not so much more from a customer perspective, but not so much from a, let's say, contribution perspective. And I think that is very natural coming from the private side. The question here is, like, how can we change that, and what can change this kind of like understanding to make also private companies a part of the respective environment with the urge and to contribute as well, right? To make it more, let's say, intrinsic, rather than forcing certain stakeholders per law or, different other measurements.
Well, it's hard to answer that. My answer would be more disruptive, or adopt new tools, or have this mentality of teamwork. And you're right. Like, I use real estate, but for me, real estate is quite broad. It's not only an investor or developer, but it's like transportation, like the one that provides the infrastructure, or so you're right in that it's more like the stakeholders in the city development value chain, I would call them, because there's a lot of them. If you want to change something, you have to understand their need. If anyone wants to make more money in the end, either with taxes or yields, again, I come back to these, but then there's no motivation. For example, when Chaos started, maybe I give that example, there was nothing happening really in the world. Like, aside from the very big hit that real estate got, was in 2008, the bubble when it exploded. Aside from that, we didn't really experience anything else. So when we started, it was more like, why do we want to be with you? Like, why do you exist? To make livable cities. I'm not interested in making livable cities. I'm interested in making money. That was the answer from our customers. So when Corona hit, no one had the answer really, like, where are people moving? How are people going to move in the future? Are we going to come back to retail? There were a lot of questions. And then data became very relevant because now everybody wanted to measure. So in there, the real estate got a hit with like retail, but also overall other commerces like or stores or so on, and humans itself. So the healthcare also, the queues about depression, like in healthcare, like starting to become very long. So there was a hit everywhere, and then data became relevant. Then we had the war, or first climate change, where we need to decrease the emissions and we need to change to new sources. So then we need data to know where are we having the infrastructure and where can we start to replace. And then now with the war and the electricity prices that is going around Europe, now you need to control the electricity and start like playing all the countries together. Where are we going to get that? We're going to play. So every crisis that we are seeing during these years, it's affecting the real estate. What is happening now with electricity, that you cannot invest anymore, it's not profitable. So that developers are focusing in retaining tenants and selling or renting the apartments. All the production that they had ongoing, because it was cheap to buy land and cheap to build, now needs to be stopped. And now we're concentrating bringing the tenants here. So I think every crisis that is happening is telling us that data is relevant. So again, it's not an easy way to answer your question. It's you need to be a forerunner to get ahead of those crises. What is the next crisis? Maybe we should think that also. We have had 3 so far.
That's a gamble, right? Some things you cannot expect. Too many black swans at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, you touched upon the importance of data and the increasing importance of data. When we look at how we have to develop sustainable cities, or we can develop sustainable cities, we have to, but we also want to, right? What would you describe? Like, why is urban data that relevant, should be at the center of developing sustainable cities? And what experience have you made so far? What is key when putting data or talking about data in that environment?
Initially, also, everybody was trying to protect their data, as in it's the new gold. But now I think that businesses are realizing that they have to collaborate. So knowing a transaction of a building is not enough, or knowing maybe how many deliveries you make packages, like in transportation and logistics, is not enough. You need to know the traffic and how many cars and the hours of working and so on. So when we are realizing that I cannot do anything with this data, alone, it's when we are more willing to open and having more clear examples. It's a good start, like Netherlands or Denmark or Finland, or where we are having constant, always like more open data, more and more. Singapore, also a good example of smart city. So the more open data we have and the more we allowed to test this, the businesses to test this data, we will discover how many, overall get a return of investment. Cities are going to start getting a return because you will create jobs, you would create more companies, you would create more insights, etc.
Why is it that different? Talking about Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, Singapore. Okay, let's exclude Singapore because we focus on Europe. But why is it that different there in comparison to other countries in Europe?
I think it's just like the development of each country in general. In Germany is always thought to be this very technical, engineering-driven country, exact, and so on. But a lot of the investment in infrastructure and computers was done a long time ago. So now changing those obsolete systems into new ones takes more effort. So then Germany is lagging now. But they were a forerunner once. And newer countries like Finland, for example, when Finland became independent like 100 years ago, they really fought. And there was an amazing sense of community that I saw here. They went from famine and not having houses and winning the war against Russia to super good housing and infrastructure and top of the world education and technical. Like a lot of the tech startups come from Finland. Like we have Nokia legacy. So when you see all the investment that is happening, then of course you're going to become the forerunner there. And then even countries in Europe have these. If we see at Italy, they were a superpower also, centuries ago. But then they have a lot of all infrastructure that they need to renovate, and then government needs to make right investments. If you haven't read this book about mission economy, I don't know if you have heard it, but it's a very good book that speaks about the investments, like public and private working together, and the investments that the government has to make. So instead of like covering the risks of private companies, like helping there when things are getting wrong, they should be the forerunners. NASA is a good example of that. It was a public organization and everybody wanted to work there because it was disruptive. And I think we don't have governments today where we feel that I want to work for that government. It's disruptive. We should be doing that more. We instead build startups.
What is interesting that with regards to that, you can also see a disparity in Europe itself, right? I mean, we've been talking to, in I think our first episode or one of our first episodes, we've been talking to an urban planner from the city of Amsterdam. She told us that Amsterdam, the city, has a CTO, right? Which for us was something where we're just like, okay, wow, this is like having this title, having this responsibility and this enablement is very interesting because it shows that mindset shift. And that is the interesting thing about Amsterdam. It's one of the most progressive cities in Europe, right? When it comes to new concepts and new transportation concepts, new logistic concepts, because they have to, right? Because the city is so dense, it's coming to its edges of its capabilities to serve the people. And yet again, and this I think factors in what you just said, if Amsterdam does not find a solution, the city will become more unattractive in the future, which will attract less people, right? Because then again, I can choose. But I think there are a lot of things going on in Europe that are on the bright side. Yet again, I think especially in Germany, we have a little bit different understanding of what the public sector is and what it can do, right? So it's always a little bit frustrating. But do you have some good examples, some other good examples maybe as well, where public and private sector use data for the good and for improving significantly the quality of life and therefore everything else, like also from a sociological and economical perspective? So do you have some good go-to examples?
Yeah, I think Helsinki is also a good example. we also have a CDO, so Chief Digital Officer. And you can see also that the brand of Helsinki, it's quite progressive. I don't know if you have followed their pages and so on, but even their brand, their look and everything is so young, and they want to attract, and they have now adopted Finnish, Swedish, English, as their languages. So already, like, using English as a main language is already telling you how internationalized you are. So Helsinki has done a lot of steps moving forward, also opening data for every actor to start using. And there's a lot of hackathons and a very huge startup ecosystem in Helsinki, like with Maria01, the city of Helsinki donating an old building for this hub to work. And then Slush, was also coming from this like entrepreneur mindset, like thinking like disruptive. And imagine that, well, Slush is quite amazing, so, and it draws a lot of people. So I think all those steps are part of that community. I also want to point out that other cities like Tampere in Finland that are not the capital, but they're making huge steps and investments also in having this ecosystem and being open and opening, plans. For example, if I go back to UN SDGs, one of the milestones that we cover is digitalizing the zoning, which is quite hard to digitalize in every country. But we started to have other cities in Finland, but not Helsinki yet. So also having sometimes a CDO slows things down because you are spending so much time in the strategy that the startups are more fast-paced. So it comes also with pros and cons, I think. But there's good examples over everywhere, I think. And in Finland, I've seen that also, how public and private works very well together.
I'm super curious, Natalia, to hear more about like a surprise on your journey collecting all those holistic urban data so far. Was there anything where you really thought, wow, this is impressive or frustrating or whatever?
Oh, there has been a lot of things. And then we make fun sometimes also ourselves. For example, our data scientist sometimes comes like, if you are single, you want to live in this area. And goes and checks like, where are the singles living, But we have made quizzes also with our investors. For example, if you are a dog owner, where would you live? Or if you would want to avoid completely COVID, where would be the safest place to be then? And then we check with data. Other interesting things is like the activity. We have patterns, and we noticed that there was activity on the lakes. And we were thinking that why this is an error, Then we realized it was when the lakes were frozen and people are walking on the lakes. And that was fun also. We have a lot of like empty offices in Finland or Helsinki. And it has been a problem for a big time, and newspapers have been discussing that. But then when we checked, it is true that a lot of them are vacant. So when we make the comparison in the map, you can see how many vacancies you have as well. And then you transform them in residential. That's what the city is doing. But then you build more offices. So it's just like vicious circle. Services also. What kind of services we have in an area and how it determines an area. So in some areas we have a lot of sports and others like a lot of commerce. And then you can check the income and the demographic group also. And they are quite interesting to see. Or with one customer, they were having a restaurant and we analyzed the catchment area in different parts. One was not doing very good and the other, yes. And the one that was doing very good was quite lonely. Like no one walking by, just in the middle of nowhere. But the whole catchment area had a lot of families that wanted to go to that restaurant. So it was like driving the whole pool. In the other one, there was a lot of competition, a lot of restaurants, like no one living there. So when people went to that area to have lunch, they didn't choose that one. So there's a lot of different things you discover on the way that it's fun. Or where are the apartments rotating in the listing sites the most? That gives you an idea that always there's like a problem trying to attract tenants to that area because they're always rotating quite fast.
You mentioned before, I would like to connect the data now, or the KPIs, and how you work at Chaos with the UN SDGs, to know how did you do this? Like, how did you align your KPIs with the UN SDGs? Why did you decide to do so? And perhaps also, what are differences in your day-to-day operations after implementation, or if you compare how you do things to other companies?
When we were thinking of scaling, always in our mind of going to other countries, we were thinking of discovering insights or benchmarks, like giving you indexes that would be applied to every country. And the most logical way is to say, who has done research on that? So urban planners and UN. In order to develop the SDGs, you had to have a lot of experts coming together to establish the KPIs. And to do KPIs, you need to know about the matter. So I think that just going back to what we were doing and then comparing to what the UN had as a KPI was like quite crucial in developing our insights. So to give you an example, one very easy, it's the 15-minute city. And you can calculate that. So for us was like, we want to calculate 5, 10, 15, 20, and 1 hour. Why? Because in car is different experience than in walking and so on. So that was very easy. Another thing is the income cap. So typically developers want to have up 40% of the income around that, or of course more sometimes. But UN tells that you should have 30% of your salary or income invested into housing, so no more than that. And when we are having affordability as an index, then we use UN's cap, not the developer. But then the developer can make their own assumption, But then we are showing what would be the best. So it's quite natural to integrate in the indexes as well.
Yeah, but how does that fit in with your customers? Like if your customer is a developer, I mean, it's one thing, to have the goal to make the world a better place, and then there comes the reality check, right? How's your experience with that?
Well, we always say that we advise. We don't tell you where to invest or what to do, but we show you the data. It's up to you what you do with that. So we are not consultants. We are just showing you what the data says. Eventually, I think it's going to make sense little by little, because if everybody's lowering the rent, they want to lower as well, because you want to attract tenants. Mm-hmm. So, and if everybody's increasing, then you want to increase. So I think it's like a snowball effect. In any case, they have to figure out like, okay, if we have too many expensive apartments and they're not selling, why? Or if they're selling, also maybe there's another reason, like rich people in the area.
If you now say we don't tell them what to do, we show them data and explain what the data says, isn't that sometimes super frustrating then? Because I imagine that like they do what they do, and you can, for you, the data language is pretty like on the point, but they just ignore it. They see it and they ignore it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to add your own 2 cents. And then you have to also understand that we cannot control anything as humans, and we are satisfied that we are doing the right thing in that sense. I think eventually the new generations are very demanding, and they will ask more responsibility also from companies. So they would want to go or support companies that are actually doing the right thing. If you're one of those companies that might not be doing the right thing, then I think you're going to be left to the side also. And eventually you will need to make a decision as a business, like, where do I want to position myself?
And do you see a difference like on customer side when it comes to age? If it's like the new generation being very demanding, is it a different reaction when you show them the data compared to others, or is that hard to say?
Yeah, age influences. So the young ones are the most able to adopt these tools. Sometimes, yes, our customers have said like, oh, I didn't know that looked like that. And we have a lot of these wow, like effects in the meetings. So that's really cool, because then you don't have to convince, you don't have to sell. It's just you're seeing it yourself. And yeah, we have had a lot of those moments. They're actually the most satisfying ones when you're understanding that, okay, there's a reason I'm doing this.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. Yeah. Okay, I think, Mark, Natalia, we have to come to an end. If there's nothing else you have to like really say, then I would like to close with a few fire questions where you have just a few seconds to answer. We don't want to very long answer. It's just a yes or no, a black or white, ideally. So are you ready for that?
Yeah, I try to be.
Yes, you are. I'm pretty sure you are. So, Natalia, startup or corporate?
Startup.
Urban or rural area?
Urban.
Environmental or social impact?
Social.
Build new or modernize?
Modernized.
High-rise or low-rise building?
High-rise.
Bike or public transport?
Ooh, both.
That's the joker.
Public. Public that allows your biking. Yeah.
Rent or own a car?
Rent.
Disruptive or keeping with tradition?
Disruptive, unless it's Mexican food, and then keeping with tradition.
That's okay. I get that.
Yeah.
Work from home or from the office?
Office.
Order online or go shopping?
Online.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Natalia. It was fun and always super impressive to talk to you. I think you're an awesome founder, an awesome CEO. You know what you're doing. It's great to feel your passion. Even though we did not meet back then at Slush where you met Mark, I'm happy that the two of you met so that it led us to this podcast session.
And Marco was roasting me there, I remember. So
That's my job description. But maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, what's coming for Chaos next year?
So we are going into more geographies. That's really nice. Then we have really, really interesting data science projects. So it involves AI and machine learning and simulation. So it's very proud of that. And then, of course, just growing the team, getting to that 1 million in revenue sales. So working hard for that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So fingers crossed. Sounds amazing. Can you already tell us what geographies are you adding up?
Well, Netherlands is the next one. And then Sweden, Germany, maybe until there I tell you.
Yeah, okay, but sounds great. So if we can do anything to help you open some doors, let us know. Always
Thank
happy
you.
to support.
Thank you very much. Yes, and thank you for having me as well. It's always a pleasure to talk to you three also. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. And if you are about to raise a round, drop us a note at LinkedIn or via email at idea@2bx.vc. Let's have a talk and see where we can help. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head on over to eu.vc, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EU VC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to eu.vc.